Of course, yes.
Good. Okay. Thank you, David. It's a great pleasure to be with you this evening and share some ideas with you. When I came to the United Synagogue, it astonished me that all of the Jews that I came across, regardless of how far they had sort of strayed from Judaism or how little Torah they knew, everybody knew that we keep 2 days Yom Tov, and the only reason that we keep 2 days Yom Tov is because there used to be a time of some sort of doubt of the day, of whether it was Yom Tov on this day or that day, and therefore we don't really need to keep it anymore, but the rabbis can't change it, and therefore it's not really real, and all of this sort of stuff. Everybody seemed to know this thing, and it bothered me a lot that I didn't have a sort of comprehensive answer to this particular point. Suffice to say that I've got a much better answer than just saying, well, we don't have a Sanhedrin and we can't do anything about it. Suffice to say that nobody listens to me and they all still do what they do, but there are a number of reasons why we keep 2 days Yom Tov above and beyond the reason given, the classic reason given, which we're going to look at as well, and I'll show you that there have to be other reasons for that, relating to Shavuos, which I know we've just sort of gone past, but we're near enough to it that I feel justified in being able to talk about it. I apologise that I'm going to give you sheets separately, because the photocopier in Northwood has been a little ill recently, so we're not able to do proper sheets, but at least you've got one at each time. It sort of stops you from reading ahead as well, which is good. Okay, I'm not going to ask anybody to read, so don't get scared. I will translate everything. I'm going to assume, and I apologise in advance. I'm going to assume that we'll translate everything. So if that sort of feels like I'm talking down to you, I apologise, but it's probably the best way of doing it. Okay, so the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah will start off over there. It says that there are 6 months in which messengers were sent forth. Who are these messengers? So these are people who were sent forth to declare that Rosh Chodesh had taken place. Okay, and this was important in order to make sure that all of the festivals were fixed on a particular date. And of course, as the Gemara says, they go forth on Nisan on account of Pesach, on Av on account of the fast, okay, Tisha B'Av, Elul on account of the New Year, Tishri for the adjustment of the festivals, Kislev on account of Chanukah, Adar on Purim. When the temple stood, they used to go forth to report Iyar on account of Pesach Sheni as well. Okay, we're not going to get into the nitty-gritty of all of this, but the important thing to note is that messengers were sent out to all of the communities around Eretz Yisrael in order to get the message out that Rosh Chodesh had been declared. Because the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah talks about Rosh Chodesh being declared by 2 witnesses who would come to the Sanhedrin and they would say, we saw the moon and it was a tidy slither, or we saw a new moon or whatever, and they would be tested as to what the moon looked like, and then eventually the Sanhedrin would declare that Rosh Chodesh had taken place. And once they declared that, that message had to be sent out. Okay, all fine so far. Any questions, just yell at me. Maimonides, the Rambam, writes the following. He says, when the Sanhedrin functioned and the calendar was established based on the sighting of the moon, the inhabitants of the land of Israel and all the places where the messengers of Tishri would arrive would celebrate the holidays for 1 day only. The inhabitants of the distant places that were not reached by the messengers of Tishri would celebrate the holidays for 2 days because of the doubt involved. Okay, what we call Sveika D'Yoma, the doubt of the day. For they did not know which of the 2 days the month had been fixed by the inhabitants of the land of Israel. So the truth is, everybody had a reasonable idea as to how many days each month should last, either 29 days or 30 days. Okay, it was fairly standard that each month would either have 29 or 30. But since there was always this doubt that witnesses might come, they might not come, there was a sort of a little bit of a suffix, a little bit of a doubt as to exactly when Rosh Chodesh would fall, and so therefore these messengers would have to come out and say actually Rosh Chodesh was on that particular date and confirm whichever day it was on. Okay, so it makes sense that the people living around Jerusalem and in Israel, where those messengers could get to quite quickly, would only need to keep 1 day Yom Tov. Why? Because by the time the messengers came out, let's take Nisan for example. So Pesach is on the 15th of Nisan. So they would have enough time to get to all the areas surrounding Yerushalayim and be able to declare that Rosh Chodesh was on this particular day, count 15 days, and there, boom, you have it. That's Pesach. But of course, to get to far-flung communities, it would take a significant amount of time. They wouldn't be able to get there in time for Pesach. So they would simply keep 2 days, based on whether it could be that the month was 29 days, it could be that it was 30 days. And as a result, they would keep 2 days Yom Tov outside of the land of Israel. Very straightforward, and everybody knows this. Okay, let's skip source C. Turn over the page. Except that everybody forgets that there is a little bit of an anomaly. Because if this is the only reason to keep 2 days Yom Tov, Shavuos is a bit of an enigma. Okay, when is Shavuos? When does it fall?
49 days after Pesach.
Right, very good. Very good. So we all were taught, or I was certainly taught at Cheder, that Shavuos is on the 6th and 7th of Sivan. Okay? The Torah never says that, of course, you know that. Okay, so look in the Torah, what does it say? Svartam lochem machar es Shabbos miyam aviachem es oima hatnufa sheva shavasais tamimois tiyena ad machar Shabbos hashvius tisbru hachamishim yom ikraftem mincha chadasha laHashem. Okay, there is no mention of a date, because all you're doing is counting from Pesach, second day of Pesach, count the Omer, and then boom, you make Shavuos. So now you've got, first of all, if you're working from Rosh Chodesh Nisan, you've got 15 days till Pesach, and then from Pesach, 16 days rather, because you've got until the second day Pesach, and you've got a plus 49 days all the way up to Shavuos. So you've got plenty of time for the messengers to be able to get from Jerusalem to all of the surrounding areas and tell them exactly when Rosh Chodesh Nisan was, and therefore there should be no need to keep 2 days Shavuos. So why do we? And don't think that we just sort of do it out of some, well, we're just being a little frummer or, a little bit machmir, because if you think about it, there's a serious repercussions for people who keep Yom Tov when they shouldn't, right? Number one, you're being mevatel a Torah mitzvah, or at least men are being mevatel a Torah mitzvah, putting on tefillin, okay, because we won't be putting on tefillin on Yom Tov. All our tefillis will be wrong, apart from anything else. The fact that we don't do malacha and everything else doesn't really matter, but it does make a big difference. So, why? Why do we keep 2 days Shavuos outside of Israel, and obviously not in Israel, but certainly outside of Israel, and why do we continue doing it? So this made me realize that there must be something else going on. There has to be something about Shavuos that is different. Okay, so what we're going to do is look at the events surrounding Matan Torah and see if we can understand precisely what Shavuos is, what happened on Shavuos, and why perhaps there are 2 days of Shavuos. So, source E says, Dabru el kol adas Israel leimor ba'asor lochedesh hazeh v'yikchu lahem ish se leveis avois se labois. Okay, this is talking, of course, about the Paschal offering, the Paschal lamb. Okay, so we know that the Paschal offering was taken on the 10th of Nisan, right? That not sacrificed. The lamb itself was taken. Okay, and this is, by the way, on which day? Anyone know? Which day of the week?
The 14th is.
The 14th is when they offered it and ate it, but they took it on Shabbos. Right? Shabbos was the 10th of Nisan. How do we know? Because Shabbat Hagadol, says the Shulchan Aruch, the Mishnah Berurah, Shabbat Hagadol, which is the Shabbos before Pesach, is called Shabbat Hagadol because of the nes, because of the miracle of the fact that they were able to take these little lambs which were Egyptian gods. The fact that the Egyptians basically stood there watching the people who had been servants and slaves taking what they considered to be gods, and they were going to sacrifice them. And there are many midrashim written about it, but this happened on Shabbos. Okay, says the Gemara, source F. Yeah, it says Toshmo, come in here. As the Nisan in which the Israelites departed from Egypt, on the 14th day they slaughtered their Pesach sacrifices, on the 15th they left Egypt, and in the evening the firstborns were smitten. This is not my translation, by the way. And that day, when they left, was Thursday. So if you work backwards, the 10th was the Shabbos. So if you read below, it says, we now know that the first Paschal lamb was taken on Shabbat, the 10th of Nisan, 2448, the first Shabbat HaKadol, and sacrificed and eaten on Wednesday, the 14th of Nisan. The firstborn were killed at Chatzos, midnight on the 15th of Nisan, and the Israelites fled Egypt in the morning of the Thursday, which is the 15th of Nisan, which of course is Pesach. Okay, now the dates are going to be very important. Okay, so what happens next? Says the Torah. The third month, which is Sivan, Nisan year, Sivan, the children of Israel's departure from Egypt, on this day they arrived in the desert, says Rashi, Bayom Hazeh was Berosh Chodesh. So the first of Sivan, they arrived at Sinai. Okay? The question is, what happened next? Let's give you another sheet. Now, it gets a little bit technical. The Gemara itself is a little difficult to work through, but actually, if you look at it in the table form, it actually all makes a lot of sense. Okay, so the Torah goes on and describes the following. It says, Vayom Hashem el Moshe, the top of page 3, this is source H. Vayom Hashem el Moshe, Lech el ha'am v'kidashtam hayoim u'machar v'chibsu simnoisam. Okay, those two words, hayoim u'machar, are going to be very important. Hayoim means today, u'machar and tomorrow. V'hayu nechoinim layom hashlishi, ki vayom hashlishi yered Hashem le'enei kol ha'am al har Sinai. Okay, so the Lord says to Moses, go to the people and sanctify them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes, and be ready by the third day. For the third day the Lord will come down in the sight of the people upon Mount Sinai. Now, this is where it gets interesting. The Gemara in Shabbos analyzes precisely what's going on and what's happening at this particular point. So says the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught it the following. B'shishi b'chodesh nitnu aseres adibros liYisrael. Right, that's what we all thought. The 6th of Sivan, the 10 commandments were given to Israel. Rabbi Yossi Omer b'shiva boy. Rabbi Yossi says they were on the 7th. Okay. Now, what on earth is going on? What is Rabbi Yossi saying, and why is he saying it? And not only that, normally we would paskin according to the Rabbanon, and we're going to prove later on that we actually paskin, we actually hold like Rabbi Yossi. Okay. Says Rava, all agree that they arrived in the Sinai desert on the 1st of the month. All agree that the Torah was given to Israel on Shabbat. Okay? They differ on the fixing of the new moon. Rabbi Yossi holds that the new moon was fixed on the first day of the week, which was Sunday, and on that day Moshe said nothing to them on account of the exhaustion from the journey. On Monday he said to them, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests. On Tuesday he informed them of the order to set boundaries, and on Wednesday they separated themselves from their wives, okay, even though in the Torah it comes in a slightly different order. But the rabbis hold the new moon was fixed on Monday, and on that day they said nothing to them on account of the exhaustion. On Tuesday he said to them, you shall be to me a kingdom of priests. On Wednesday informed them to set boundaries, and on Thursday they separated themselves. So if you look at the two, the tables below, you have the events according to the Chachamim, which is what we would all have thought, because we were all taught that the 6th of Sivan is Shavuos, because that's when the Torah was given. And we keep 2 days Shavuos because of Sveka Dioma. But look what it says. See, this is according to the Chachamim. But according to Rabbi Yossi says if the 1st of Sivan is on Sunday, and everybody agrees that the Torah was given on Shabbos, well, Shabbos isn't going to be until the 7th of Sivan. So Rabbi Yossi holds that the Torah was given on the 7th of Sivan. There's no question about it. Everybody agree? Questions so far? I'll just let you digest that for a little bit, because it's weird. I mean, it's...
So the Omer isn't related to the giving of the Torah in terms of its... So we said in the first source D,
right.
You count
right, very good.
7th week, 15th
Correct. Correct. The Omer is something separate.
Yeah.
You're right. I mean, there is a connection between the two, obviously.
Shavuos,
but
which we believe started essentially at the end of the Omer.
Correct.
Isn't as...
Well, this is a good question. So what's going on?
According to the Chachamim, yes. According to the
right. So according to the Chachamim, it all makes sense because you count the Omer and then you keep Shavuos, which is Matan Torah, and you got an extra day, which is the 7th day. Why, we don't know. According to Rabbi Yossi, you count the Omer, then you keep a day of Shavuos, and then you celebrate Matan Torah. Very strange. Piliploim, as they would say in Yeshiva. Right? Very, very strange. Okay, so go over the page, page 4, source J. And this is where the Gemara tries to understand exactly what is going on. Okay, so an objection is raised. Okay, it says Meisvei, what's the objection? The Kidashtem Hayoim Umachar. Remember those two words? Hayoim Umachar, today and tomorrow. Right? Kasha le Rabbi Yossi. Why is it a problem for Rabbi Yossi? Because he, if you look at the table, he maintained that there were 3 days of preparation. For the Chachomim, Hayoim Umachar, today and tomorrow, implies 2 days of separation. 2 days of preparation. Right? Preparation on the 4th of Sivan, preparation on the 5th of Sivan, and the Torah was given on the 6th. That makes sense. Rabbi Yossi, because he holds that Rosh Chodesh was on Sunday, not on Monday, he requires an extra day. So he holds that there are 3 days of preparation. So says the Gemara, that's a kasha for Rabbi Yossi. So what's he going to say? Okay, Rabbi Yossi can answer you. This is the third line on source J. Moshe added 1 day of his own understanding. Okay, the command, sanctify them, was given him on Wednesday, and he interpreted it as implying 3 days. For it was taught in a brisa, and Rabbi Yossi brings a brisa. Moshe did 3 things of his own understanding, and the Holy One, blessed be He, gave his approval. He added 1 day of his own understanding. He separated himself from his wife entirely after the revelation, and he broke the tablets. The brisa said he added 1 day of his own understanding. Rabbi Yossi understands as follows. What verse did he interpret? Hayoim umachar, today and tomorrow. According to Rabbi Yossi, Moshe interpreted the command as follows. Today must be like tomorrow. So just as tomorrow includes the previous night, so today must include the previous night. But the night of today is already past. Therefore, it must be 2 days exclusive of today. And how do we know that the Holy One, blessed be He, gave his approval? Since the Shekhinah did not rest upon Mount Sinai until the morning of the Shabbat, which according to Rabbi Yossi was on the 7th of Sivan. So for those of you who like tables, I tried to sort of make this as clear as possible. If you imagine each of these boxes, these sort of shaded boxes a day, the command was given on the 4th of Sivan. Okay, so Hayom Umachar, says Rabbi Yossi, that can't include the 4th of Sivan as 1 day of preparation, because that day, part of that day is already passed. So therefore you have to make it both the 5th of Sivan and the 6th of Sivan as days of preparation, and therefore he pushes it off to the 7th. So according to Rabbi Yossi, the Torah was given on the 7th of Sivan, and the 6th of Sivan was a sort of 3rd day of preparation. That's what we've got so far. Okay? Everyone clear so far? Beseder. Now, the problem with Rabbi Yossi, it all sounds very compelling, but it still should leave us feeling very uncomfortable, because I'm pretty sure that when we davened on Shavuos, we said what the Shulchan Aruch is about to say at the bottom of page 4, source K. Okay, it says B'yoyim chamishim l'sfiras ha'omer hu chag Shavuos. Okay, that's we all know. The 50th day of the counting of the Omer is the festival of Shavuos. V'seder tefillah k'mo b'yom tov shel Pesach. The Seder tefillah is like the Yom Tov of Pesach. Ella she'oimrim, except that we say es Yom Chag HaShavuos Hazeh, this festival of Shavuos, Zeman Matan Torateinu. It's the time of the giving of the Torah. It's a bit of a problem, because if the 6th of Sivan, according to Rabbi Yossi, was not when the Torah is given, how can we all stand up in shul and says Zeman Matan Torateinu? Doesn't make any sense at all. We could say it on the 7th, but then what are the people in Israel going to do? Because they only keep the 6th.
We do that at the end of Sukkot. You say Shmini Chagat Azeh, and it's like Sukkot Torah the following day.
Yeah, that's true, but there at least you could say that we still have the idea of Sveik of the Omer, and we. I mean, you're right. That's partly because, I mean, even though we're keeping 2 days, right, and therefore technically it could be the 8th day of Sukkot, but we're holding it as Shmini Atzeres, correct? Is that right?
Simchat Torah is the 9th day.
Simchat Torah is the 9th, beg your pardon. So the 8th... So
the
what's
8th
the
day
problem?
Shmini Atzeret, but we have a 9th day Simchat Torah, but
Right.
when you daven you say Shmini Chagat Atzeret as a...
Yeah, no, but that's... No, Simchat Torah and Shmini Atzeres is the same thing.
Yeah,
They're the same thing. Simchas Torah is just a name for the second day of Shmini Atzeres.
Right.
Because in Israel,
Yes,
it's all
yes,
one
it's
thing.
only one day,
So I thought what you were going to ask is, for example, do you say Kiddush on Shmini Atzeres in the Sukkah or not? And that's a big shayla la'alocha as to what you do, because it could still be Sukkos if you're keeping Sveikat Yoma, but it's really Shmini Atzeres. So what do you do? Because you don't do on Shmini Atzeres. You don't go in the Sukkah. So what do you do? Anyway, it's a whole ganze
So
maisa.
here it says Zman.
Yeah, it says Zman.
Not Chag HaShavuot.
No, correct. No, it says both. It says Chag HaShavuos is there, and it says Zman Matan Torah. That's what we say in Davening.
Oh yeah, it's a really good point.
That's okay.
Meaning, but,
Apologise.
okay, so it's the Chag of,
Yeah.
but it's the time in which we're celebrating the Chag. But it's the time. It's not, we're celebrating the Chag of Shavuos, which is the time, the period in which the Torah.
So you want to understand the word Zman as period of time. How long is that period going to last for? Just the Chag of
Well,
Shavuos?
it's the period. I mean, there were 3 days preparation, or 2, or 4.
Depending on who you ask.
So it is the period.
Right.
It's the.
Okay. Could be. Okay, so let's have a look. I realise it's a lot of Maramakomis, but it's some very, very interesting ideas on this particular inyan, which I think will help to give us some clarity.
How do
Sorry, go on.
How do the Chachamim understand the Baraita of Rabbi
Good question. So they don't. I mean, the question is, how did they know that there's? How didn't they know that there was a brisa? So not everyone had to know each brisa. How would they understand that brisa? I'm not sure. The Gemara, you'd have to go on in Gemara and the Rishonim to understand it. I mean, perhaps if we were learning Be'in, I would. I'm not 100% sure how they learn that brisa. Don't know, because I think, I don't want to say because I'm not 100% sure. Okay, the Magen Avraham, however, does ask our question, top of page 5. He says, I question as to how we can say that Shavuos is the time of the giving of our Torah. Right? Is it not true that we established the Gemara in Shabbos 87a, that's our Gemara, in accordance with Rabbi Yossi, who said that the Torah was given on the 7th of Sivan? Okay, and he brings a proof for it, lahalocha, because it's brought in Yeridea that we count 6 oinos, which is 3-day period, is required before a woman can count as 7 clean days. I know that that's not exactly how it works in Taras Mishpacha, but the fact is that we paskin la halacha according to Rabbi Yossi because of that. For us, Shavuos is always on the 6th of Sivan, and in truth, the Rambam writes in the 5th chapter of Hilchos Avos Satuma that only 3 oinos, 1.5 days, are necessary. Okay, which would be like the opinion of the Chachomim. It says that Kesef Mishnah is the same text as the Rambam and the Rashba, that the Chachomim held that only 3 oinos are required and determined the halacha accordingly, meaning, according to them, you would hold that the Torah was given on the 6th of Sivan. If that is so, our minhag is according to the Rambam, and that which is written in Yeridea according to Rabbi Yossi is merely a stringency. Okay, but we actually hold like Rabbi Yossi. However, there is a further question, that the Torah was given on the 51st day of the Omer, that the Israelites left Egypt on Thursday, and the Torah was given on Shabbat. This has already been answered, that it comes to hint to us regarding the second day Yom Tov of the exile, meaning outside of Israel. And it is possible that this is what Moshe intended when he added an extra day. Says the Magen Avraham something unbelievable. He says the whole point of Moshe adding an extra day was to create a second day Yom Tov. Yom Tov was only supposed to be 1 day. Yom Tov was only supposed to be the 6th of Sivan. That's when the Torah was supposed to be given. That's what God told Moses to do. He said, Hayoim umachar, today and tomorrow, 2 days of preparation. Moshe, according to the Brisa, added a day himself. He pushed off Matan Torah to the 7th of Sivan. Says the Magen Avraham, what he did was create a second day Yom Tov in Shavuos. Okay, let's have a quick look.
Sorry, can I just ask?
Yes.
Does that not affect the Omer nowadays, though? Because we keep first day on the 50th day, technically, of the Omer, right?
Yes.
But the 50th day is the 5th of Sivan, according to
the Chachomim.
or the 6th of Sivan. So
Yeah, that's because we don't hold. No, because that's because we fixed the calendar.
But then the Omer must have started differently to how it did then.
Perhaps.
If it's coming a day
I'd have to
later.
look at the whole table going backwards to work it out at this time of the evening. But
Is it starting on separate and on a day earlier, the Chachamim, according to this?
No, it's only because they're changing the date of when Rosh Chodesh is, starting on the same day. The machlokes in the Gemara was on when Rosh Chodesh falls.
Whether it's a day or two.
Whether ER is mole or choser. The Chachamim hold that it's mole, and Rabbi Yossi hold that it's choser. That's what it is. That's it. No, it should start on the same day. Okay. Now there is. If we've got time, there is a little bit of an explanation over here regarding on what was given at Har Sinai, because everybody knows that we got the Ten Commandments at Mount Sinai. Most people also know that we received the Torah. Okay, exactly how the Torah was given is an interesting question, because if you're talking about the Chumash, like the 5 books of Moses, that's a little bit funny, because if Moses was actually handed like a Mikras Gedolos or whatever, or a Chumash or a Torah, right, that would have been a little bit weird, because like in this week's parsha and also last week's parsha in particular, it would have been quite easy to sort of think, we're about to send spies into Eretz Israel, what's going to happen? Well, let's look ahead. So clearly that's not how the Torah was given. But exactly how the Torah is given, what was given in terms of the written Torah is an interesting question. However, as we're going to see in a minute, that's not all that was given at Mount Sinai. Says the Gemara, later on, as Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi also said, when Moshe ascended on high, the ministering angel spoke before HaKadosh Baruch Hu, sovereign of the universe, what business has one born of woman amongst us? Right? Moshe literally went up and he was with the Malachim. He answered them, he has come to receive the Torah. They said to him, that secret treasure which you have hidden for 974 generations before the world was created, you want to give it to flesh and blood? Okay. Now there's it's brought down a number of places, Medrash and various other things, that there is an argument between Moses and the angels. And the argument is that the angels don't want to give up the Torah, and Moses wants to take it down. And the argument goes backwards and forwards, and he says things like, it says in the Torah, honor your mother and father, do angels have parents? Okay, all this sort of crazy stuff. But let's look at the Beis HaLevi. The Beis HaLevi, in fact, takes our little thread from this, which is quite interesting. I'll read it quite quickly. It's a long makor. It says, in order to understand the matter that the angels asked Hashem why the Torah should be given to man, given that many of the commandments contained in the Torah are performed with the body, which an angel does not have, they were only concerned with the fact that the Torah was to be split into 2, a written Torah and oral Torah. And the character of the oral Torah are the principles and laws of interpretation that make the oral Torah distinct and allow for the creation of new, innovative laws and original details without end, and as long as the length of the land. And this is what the verse meant in Tehillim, the Lord will give out a word, they will announce it to a great multitude, meaning that one saying in the written Torah gives rise to many elucidations and many details, and one verse gives rise to many explanations. And this is the meaning of, they will announce it to a great multitude, from Tehillim. Okay? And the Torah was given to Israel so that they would be able to expound it. And as they agreed according to its principles, so too it becomes the truth. This is similar to what it says in Bava Metzia, it is not in heaven. Meaning that the world is how it is only because the Beis Din say so. And this is what the angels wanted, to give the Torah to them and not to man. And that the truth should be according to what they expound. So what were the Malachim trying to hold on to? Torah Shebal Peh. Torah Shebichtav, you're right. It doesn't say anything about angels. It's all about human beings. What they wanted was Torah Shebal Peh. They didn't want to give that power over to mankind. This is the Beis HaLevi Vayta, page 6. We got page 6. Yeah. And this is what it means when it says, what is man that you should remember him, and the son of man that you should be mindful of him? They, the angels, said that man is not worthy to merit it at all, even to appoint him, to entrust and designate the Torah to him. You give him dominion over the work of your hands. You have placed everything beneath his feet. That you also made him to rule over, as we have written. And from this it is possible to answer the question of the Magen Avraham of how do we say that Shavuos is Zaman Matan Torahenu, the time of the giving of our Torah. We have established that the Torah was given on the 7th of the month. Only the matter about which the verse speaks, go to the people and prepare them today and tomorrow. And Moshe added a day on his own accord as he expounded today like tomorrow, right, as it's brought in Drat Shabbat, which we saw before. And God agreed as the divine presence did not descend until the next day. And we find that this is the gift that the Torah was given to Israel, and according to which Moshe expounded from the verse in Shemos, which we read, brought by the Gemara in Shabbos, which became the truth on the 6th of Sivan. the fact that the divine presence did not descend on that day, meaning on the 6th of Sivan, and delayed until the 7th in agreement to Moshe's expounding of the verse, gives that day the designation of the giving of the Torah, as the Torah was given to them as a gift. And so the receiving of the Torah was on the 7th of Sivan, because Israel received it, and the giving of the Torah was on the 6th of Sivan. What is he talking about? He's talking in cryptic language. There are two Torahs. There is a Torah Shebechtav and a Torah Shebal Peh. They received the Torah Shebechtav, according to Rabbi Yossi, on the 7th of Sivan. What did they receive on the 6th of Sivan? Torah Shebal Peh. Because what was it that happened on the 6th of Sivan? They should have got the written Torah on that day. Moshe made the first drosha, the first act of Torah Shebal Peh, and he pushed off Torah to the 7th of Sivan.
So why do we lay the Ten Commandments on the first day?
Good question. Okay, good question. Probably because it's the beginning of the Chag, but hold that thought for a minute, because there's other things to talk about. Okay, the problem is that as soon as you answer this question, right, you then generate a whole range of other questions, right? For example, if we're going to answer the question as to why we should keep 2 days Yom Tov, which isn't about Sveikat Diyoma, then you're going to have to ask the question, well, why don't they keep 2 days Yom Tov in Eretz Yisrael? Okay, so that's my first question. But
Rosh Hashanah was 2 days, why can't Shavuot be 2 days?
well, Rosh Hashanah is 2 days because
The reason, yeah.
it's the first and second. But if you're going to find any other reason other than Sveikat Diyoma, other than the doubt of the day, then that would imply that they should be keeping 2 days as well. Anyway, we'll see. Hold that thought. Okay, so the Beis HaLevi explains that the angels wanted the oral aspect of the Torah, the ability to expound the Torah that is inherent in the Torah itself. That is why we say Zaman Matan Torateinu, the time of the giving of our Torah. Okay, our Torah refers to the oral Torah. It's ours. It's the Jewish people's. The ability to expound the Torah in the same way that Moses did. The 2 days are for the oral Torah and the written Torah. Okay, so then the question becomes, why should we do this outside the land of Israel? Okay. Let me just see what this is. Right, so the Gemara, the famous Gemara, which is the one that everybody knows, the Gemara in Beitzah, is that the reason that we maintain the fixing of, we maintain the 2 day Yom Tov period, even though the calendar has now been fixed, is because we have to be mindful of the fact that these are minhagim of our forefathers, our ancestors, and it could well be that there'll be a government decree that will sort of nullify the calendar and it will create confusion. Well, it's highly unlikely that that will happen. Nevertheless, this is the primary source. Now we've seen that there is something about Shavuos which is a little bit different. Okay, says the Rambam at the bottom of page 6. At present, when there is no Sanhedrin and the Basin of Israel establishes the months from a fixed calculation, according to the simple law, it would be appropriate for Jews in all places to keep only 1 day, even in distant places in the diaspora, like the land of Israel, because we all rely on one calculation. However, the sages ordained that we should retain the customs of our forefathers. This is what gets people riled up. Why? Okay, let's give you the last sheet and we'll see. Okay, there's a very funky source, which is not. It's a little off the beaten track, but the Sefer Asora Ma'amoros. It's the Rabbi Mifano, and I promise this is the last sheet I'll give you. He says, "In truth, we observe the Lord's holiday on the day that our Torah was given, a holy festival at the end of the 50-day period that follows Pesach. The Pesach of Egypt was on a Thursday, and everybody agrees that the Torah was given on Shabbat, which was 51 days later. This indeed is a difficulty. The answer is certainly that since the Torah was given outside the land of Israel, Hashem, who desires to provide us with merit, took the opportunity to give us our share in His Torah. He chose to celebrate Himself in all His glory, the second day of the diaspora holiday, which Moshe added on his own initiative, according to Rabbi Yossi. So according to the Rabbi Mifano, the reason that we keep 2 days Shavuos outside of Israel and not inside Israel is because this whole process took place outside of Israel. It was in Sinai, right? They weren't in Eretz Yisrael. So this whole idea of adding a second day Yom Tov has that sort of imprint of being in Chutz La'aretz. And that's the difference between Shavuos in Chutz La'aretz and Shavuos in Eretz Yisrael. Okay? It's not the best answer, but it's the best answer I could find. It's not. I can still think of kashas, but it at least brings us to a point of understanding the whole dynamic of Shavuos as a 2-day chag, and that gave a sort of a paradigm to the other chagim. Now, of course, there are some exceptions to that. Okay, Yom Kippur is an exception. Thank God, right? Because of Pekuach Nefesh. Okay, we don't keep 2 days Yom Kippur because people will suffer, quite severely. So how come? How come? How can we suddenly do that? So the truth is, again, the Sveika Dioma aspect, the doubt of the day. The Jewish people generally had a very good idea as to how many days each month should be, and it was very unusual for that to be changed. Although before the calendar was fixed, they had to rely on messengers coming to confirm which day Rosh Chodesh should be, so it was reasonable. Another example is the Omer. Okay, there's a halacha that if you don't know which day of the Omer it is, but you know that it must be the 13th or the 14th, but you can't quite tell, right? You can't sit and count, well, today might be the 13th day of the Omer, or it might be the 17th, the 14th day of the Omer. You can't do that. That's not called counting. But the problem is that if there's a problem of Sveika Dioma for Pesach, then there should be a problem of Sveika Dioma for all of the days of the Omer as well, until the messengers come. So how does that work? So again, they had a reasonable idea as to which day of the Omer it should be, and they would count accordingly. So this whole issue of Sveika Dioma kind of loses its sort of power in that sense, and I find this very compelling. Now, to come back to your question of the why do we lay the Aseres Dibros on the first day? Because that implies that we're talking about, the whole point of the laning is that it relates to what is actually going on the Chag. Okay, I don't have a source for an answer. I can think of a number of different answers, but that would be a little balabatish of me, so I'm not going to do it. But the Aseres Dibros themselves are very interesting, and in fact, the answer I'll give you is a little bit off the beaten track, but it's not the answer, but it's my answer for this evening. Why were we given Aseres Dibros in the first place? What was the point of them? Okay, all of the mitzvahs that were given could have been in the Torah, right? We were given the whole Torah. We were given 613 mitzvahs. Why give us 2 tablets with 10 other mitzvahs on them, or 10 mitzvahs contained within the Torah? What's the point of that? So I think it's a Rashi that brings down that it's a Rashi, I can't remember where it is. It's brought down. Sadi and Gaon wrote a sort of poems relating to each one of the Aseres Dibros, expounding it to all 613 commandments. Okay, so let me ask you a question. If you go to the man on the street and say to him, name one of the 10 commandments, okay, you probably get a few of them, right? Most of us probably could, but certainly, you'd expect most of us to be able to name pretty much all of the 10 commandments. If you ask someone to name all 613 commandments, that's a bit more difficult. And if you ask someone to explain Kol HaTorah Kula and all of the halachas that go with it, well, that's impossible unless you're, a big godel or whatever. The whole point of the 10 commandments was that it was a sort of lahavdil, a zip file of Torah. Okay, remember a zip file? You know what a zip file is? You've got a very big file. You can't transmit the whole thing. So in the olden days, right before Dropbox, you used to make it into a zip file, and you could that was a much smaller file, right? Now you couldn't open the whole thing, right? I remember as a kid, you get a zip file and trying to open it, it was impossible, syntax error or whatever, right? You have to unzip it. But the fact is that it's a type of what we call in the engineering world of data compression. Okay, it loses a lot of the details, but it compresses the data of Torah into 10 very easy to remember commandments. 5 bein adam l'chavera, 5 bein adam l'makom. And as a result, it gives a person something that they can take with them, put in their pocket, and remember the whole time. But what do you need in order to get back to all 613 commandments? You need Torah Shabbat Peh. You need to be able to make droshes from them, to understand, like Rav Sadi Gaon did, how each one of them relates to all of the other mitzvahs in the Torah. The same thing with the Shema, by the way. The Shema also has the Aseres Dibros sort of knitted into it in some way. And there are some Sidurim which actually print above the Shema exactly which mitzvahs in the Aseres HaDibros relate to different phrases in the Shema. So all of these things were there to get the Jewish people who had come to Sinai with nothing out of slaves from Egypt, nothing at all. They didn't even know what to eat. They had to eat milchiks, right? That's why we have milchiks and Shavuos. And yet they were given something that they were able to take away and learn. So maybe, I don't know, it's not an answer that's written anywhere, it's the answer that I came up from the top of my head, but that's one idea at least. At the bottom of this, we're not going to go through it explicitly, there is a rough cook as well, which I dug out. It's been paraphrased here. I've lifted this from a sefer. If you want to know the source of it, I can give it to you. The whole rough cook is in Hebrew over here. He explains it in a slightly different way. He talks about the fact that Sivan, there's a Rashi on when it says Vayir Vayivoke Yoim Hashishi. What is Hashishi? So there's the second pshat in Rashi on that. Hashishi is the Hashishi refers to the 6th of Sivan. Okay, and Rav Kook takes that idea further, and he says those days from the 1st of Sivan to the 7th of Sivan reflect the first 7 days of creation, the 6 days of creation and Shabbat, and the fact that the Torah was given. The machlokas between the Chacham and Rabbi Yossi relates to the Torah either being given on the 6th day, which was the creation of man, or the 7th day, which was the creation of Shabbat, which is a more universal concept. Okay, so you can try and sort of fit that in with everything else that we've said. I'm not going to do it for you, as it's already coming up to 9:15, but if you have any questions on anything I've said, I'd be pleased to take them now. But, yeah. Silence.
So why only 1 day in Eretz Yisrael?
So I think because of the Rebbe Mefano. I think he sort of tries to explain that because all of this took place outside of Eretz Yisrael, this is something for Chutz La'aretz. This is something that's necessary for Chutz La'aretz. Perhaps, for me, as someone who lived in Israel for 5 years, I'm sure many of you have also spent time in Eretz Yisrael, it has a different feeling. Spending Yom Tov in Eretz Yisrael is completely different, not just because it's nicer and it's hotter and the food's better, but it has a certain air of Kedusha about it. And every Dalet Amos that you walk in Eretz Yisrael, they say is a mitzvah. I'm sure it is. So coming here and having to keep 2 days, maybe actually Yom Tov is a good thing. I mean, I know it's hard work, right? Believe me, as a rabbi, it's pretty hard work. 2 droshes instead of 1 drosha. But, the truth is that perhaps we needed a little bit more outside of Eretz Yisrael. Perhaps. I don't know. I mean, that's again, it's a very unsatisfactory balabatish answer. But for me, a lot of these Makuros indicate that there is something more special about 2nd day Yom Tov than merely saying Sveika Dioma and we don't really need to do it anymore.
So if this relates to Matan Torah and keeping 2 days of Shavuot, what about all the other Yom Tovim that we keep a 2nd day instead of in Israel when we don't keep a 2nd day?
Right. So again, the Rebbe Mefano says that the fact that it was taking place outside of Eretz Yisrael meant that this was going to be something that Moshe Rabbeinu created by himself, and that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave his shtimpel to, his hechsher. Why exactly? What the purpose of it was? The higher purpose of it. I mean, we could spend all night talking about it, and I mean, I could try myself, but I don't have any more Makuros to sort of offer you there. I do think it has something to do with the fact that outside of Eretz Yisrael there is a certain feeling that you're not really. There's not as much kedusha as there is. The Ramban says all the mitzvahs that we do outside of Eretz Yisrael are like practicing. Okay, we're not really we're doing mitzvahs and we have to do them, but it's not really the same. Okay, so there is something about being in Eretz Yisrael. That's where we're supposed to be. And I'm not working for Nefesh B'Nefesh, but I do often tell my own Balabatim, who are regular United Synagogue people, that unless you've got a good reason, you should go and make Aliyah. They've all got homes in Netanya and wherever, so go and live in them. That's my humble opinion. Obviously there are, you have to have Jews all over the world, and we have to be here as well. But that's how I feel about it.
The Sukkot thing always bothers me because in the 1st and 2nd days of Rosh Hashanah, and 10 days later it's going to be Yom Kippur, which you only keep 1 day, and Sukkot is only 5 days later, and there's no messengers coming in that time.
No.
And you can count down from 5, I assume.
You can count down from 5, but again, if
you counted 10 from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur or 9.
Yeah, if we could, we would keep 2 days Yom Kippur, and the only reason that we don't is because of Pekuach Nefesh.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the only
Kind
reason.
of exempted.
I mean,
from-
look, what about Hanukkah? I mean,
That was after the Torah, it wasn't really.
yeah, maybe. Was it? No, I don't think it was. No, it wasn't after the calendar was fixed.
Mikdash, but,
Not sure. Okay, I'll hold that thought. Maybe for next time.
because Purim has a whole like second day thing in your
Oh, that's
city,
a
but
different thing.
also
That's 'cause it's
sort of
brought down in the
around
Megillah.
outside of-
It's brought down in the Megillah, and the first Mishnah in Megillah talks about not only that, but it's from the 11th up to the 16th. Because of the fact that there are people living in distant places, they couldn't read Megillah for themselves, so they would come on the Monday and Thursday to wherever, to the larger towns where someone would read Megillah for them, and they were allowed to do that on the basis that they weren't going to be able to read Megillah in the places they were in.
You were saying
So
about the mitzvah of Yom Tov, like you make Kiddush on second day, you really, and you not put your tefillin on, but for Purim, you've got your mitzvah of Purim, and you say Asher Kedishanu for your Mikra Megillah.
Yeah, but we only keep Purim for 1 day, unless you could technically keep Purim for 2 days.
Yeah, if you're travelling to
Exactly. Yeah, if you live, I mean, like I did, I lived in Ramat Bet Shemesh, so you keep it on the 14th, and then you travel into Yerushalayim that night, and then you become a chayev, or you travel in the afternoon and become a chayev as soon as it's shkia, then you have to keep it twice. But that's only for silly people that would want to do that. So you don't have to do that. That's quite exceptional.
Interestingly, Rabbi Lieberman here says that if you go to Israel, you keep him in Makom
Oh,
and you
that's-
keep 1
that's
day.
different.
But he says but he also says on the other hand, that if you're in Israel and you come out of Israel for Yom Tov, you have to keep 2 days. It's Yom Tov.
Right.
You can't
Right.
put your backpack on and say it's Chol and go.
So
for a
good.
week.
I'm glad you raised that point,
Very
because
well to say about
that is that is another bone of contention, which is a slightly different halachic question, which is, if you are a ben chutz la'aretz going to Eretz Yisrael or vice versa, how many days do you keep? And now there is a psak of the Chacham Tzvi, which is that it's all geographical, which makes complete logical sense. And why wouldn't you keep 1 day Yom Tov when you go to Israel? And it is certainly a legitimate psak, and I, however, as an Ashkenazi posek, and well, not posek, but Dayan Geli is a posek, and I'm a rov of his, underneath his based in. So I am incumbent on what Dayan Geli would say, and I would have to paskin the other way. That, most of my balabatim, or a lot of my balabatim, have been very friendly with Lubavitch Rabbonim at some point, in the last 50 years or whatever, and have asked a psak at some point, going all the way back, and most of them keep 1 day Yom Tov over there. At least that has some makor. What I've started seeing, however, is a lot of people in England, who live in England and never go to Israel, have started to only keep 1 day Yom Tov, which means I get into big trouble, because it's not such a big problem. But take Pesach, for example. They start eating chometz again on the 8th day of Pesach.
And you haven't sold it back to them.
Exactly. Well, I haven't bought it back from the non-Jew, and so they're eating. So if they're eating chometz that they've sold through me, it's actually gneva from the caretaker of our shul, technically speaking. Okay, so I haven't actually resolved what I can do in that particular scenario. I have tried to have conversations with some of those people, because that's really wrong. Nobody would allow them to do that.
Hasn't Reform Judaism in this country done that? They've only paskin that you have one paskin, but they've taken upon themselves to only keep 1 day.
Yes.
So,
Yes, absolutely. Interestingly, though, I didn't want to get into it this evening, but there is an enigma of Rosh Hashanah, because the way that Rosh Hashanah actually works, because it's the first and second day, the actual sofek is on the first day, not the second day. I don't have the makor to bring it down over here, but perhaps next time we'll actually look at Rosh Hashanah. The fact that we can say Shechianu on both days, and we have to have the new fruit, and there's a sofek, do we really have to new fruit, and all this sort of stuff. It actually works out that the ikar of Rosh Hashanah is the second day of Rosh Hashanah, and the first day is actually the sofek. So just because of the fact that Elul is always 29 days and never really 30 days. So for the Reform, what they've done is actually keep the day that's a sofek, and they've neglected the one that isn't, right? Which also helps to explain perhaps why we're able to, it makes you feel more comfortable about the fact that we can, when it's Shabbos and Sunday, we don't blow shofar on first day Rosh Hashanah, we blow shofar on second day Rosh Hashanah. But the Reform is a whole different world, so I don't really spend much time worrying about what they do, to be quite honest. But yeah, That's true. Okay. Anything else?
I've got just one more question. When you said before that when Moshe brought the Torah, he brought the oral Torah before he brought the written Torah. How did that go down with Bnei Israel when somebody comes along and says, everybody do all of this, and I'm going to tell you about it? And
so
then
what it was the Beis HaLevi is saying that it was the first act of a drosha, of oral Torah on the 6th. The actual oral Torah was given after the whole events of Mount Sinai, because then the Torah speaks about how Moses would then give over what he learned to Yeshua and the Zkanim and everything else. The first mission in Pirkei Avos, right? Moshe kibul Torah from Sinai, Mosra Yeshua, Zkanim, Mosaruha, Nevi'im, Anshe Knesset HaGedolah. That whole path was started at Sinai. And that makes sense. That's another thing that people can't get their heads around, because they think that what we do as rabbis is we get the Chumash, we get the 5 books of Moses, we open them up and we say, it says over here X, and we're going to derive halachas from that. It's not how it works at all. Halacha is not derived from the written Torah in that way. The written Torah is obviously the foundation of halacha in a sense, but the Ramchal brings down in one of his essays, which I think is printed in the back of Derech Hashem, he says, if you look in the Gemara, the way that a machlokas works is that you very rarely get a machlokas that says, here is a posuk, which laws should we derive from this posuk? Very often it is, there is a halacha, and where do we see that halacha in psukim, or how do we look at that halacha in psukim? That's because the oral Torah was, in fact, the source of halacha, and that's all of the explanations that God gave to Moses at Mount Sinai. Which makes sense, because otherwise you can't understand the Torah. Okay, the classic ideas of, how would you know what to put on your doorpost? It never tells you what a mezuzah is, what tefillin is supposed to look like, what malacha is. The Torah doesn't tell us these things. So these were all the explanations given to Moses at Mount Sinai, passed on to the rest of the Jewish people. And that's, of course, when Moshe becomes the rov for the whole of the Jewish people. Yisro then tells him to delegate, etc., etc. That whole sort of process of how halacha is then derived becomes an issue of, there's an oral tradition, an oral law, which is the basis of halacha, there's a Torah, and then, in order to be able to work out, if you forget things, you've got, the 13 midos, the 13 ways of doing it from Rabbi Yishmael, where you can derive certain things. You have to have a Mesorah for that. And the process of the Gemara is very often that once it's got to a stage where people have forgotten exactly what the oral Torah was supposed to say, we then have to now look back and see, well, is it like this or is it like that? And that's where the beginning of Machlokas was. Literally, it says when Moshe Rabbeinu died, I think there's a Gemara or a Midrash, says Yeshua forgot hundreds of different halachas. Okay, and he had to derive them all back from the Torah, because that sort of link in that chain had gone. So that's the process of understanding where halacha comes from. And that's all part and parcel of what happened at Sinai. Okay? Baruch Tia.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right, so you're welcome to take these back with you, or leave them with me. Do what you want with them, and turn them into a paper aeroplane. Turn this off. Right. I need your...
Rabbi, thank you very much for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Oh, no.
Ignoring it.